All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Magandang hapon. Annyeonghaseyo. And welcome to today's public forum organized by the UP Korea Research Center. I am Marco Angulo, and I will be your moderator for today's event. We are happy to welcome you back to another forum of UPKRC. Despite the distance that this pandemic has created, we are still able to meet each other online through Facebook and YouTube. So we'd like to greet everyone wherever you are in the world right now. Most especially, we'd like to greet our friends, our colleagues, especially from the Department of Linguistics, UPKRC as well. Um, Personally, my friends and family are also watching right now. Um, and I hope we have a fruitful and an enjoyable forum today. So, as you've seen in our publicity materials, this forum is about the latest Netflix hit Squid Game, and perhaps an early warning for those who are joining us here who might not have seen the series yet. Spoiler alert, definitely we'll be talking about a lot of things mentioned in the show. So if you haven't seen the series yet, you might want to skip this for now. You will be able to watch the recording of our forum later on, but surely perhaps you've heard some things about this series that you might be interested to learn more about. So still welcome. And before we begin the program, we would like to remind everyone of some house rules for today's forum. Throughout the forum, you can send us your comments and questions through our Facebook or YouTube comment section. Please, as much as possible, introduce yourself together with your affiliation. And all of these questions will be collected and answered during the open forum. And we would like to remind everyone as well that this forum is a safe place for everyone. And so we will not tolerate any form of bullying or trolling, academic or otherwise. And the organizer reserves the right to remove those who will create any disruption in any part of the program. So let's make this forum a good one, a happy one for everyone. All right. And to formally begin our forum, let me welcome Dr. Kyung Min Bae, the OIC Director of UP Korea Research Center, for her brief opening message.
Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Annyeonghaseyo, 여러분. We are very delighted to see all of you this afternoon in this exciting forum. So today's forum's title is Squid Game, Everyone's Story. A month ago in September, the series was first aired on Netflix. Although the series was exclusive on Netflix, I think many other Korean dramas and movies have been enjoying higher chances of gaining global popularity beyond domestic viewing rate inside Korea, thanks to Netflix. And not many really expected that Squid Game will really be hugely recognized and massively watched in so many countries, including the Philippines. And personally, when I heard the title of this series, I had no idea what the show would be about. Squid Game, or 오징어 game in Korean, is what my parents or older generations used to play in their childhood. I played all other games in my childhood, but not really particularly Squid Game. So I wondered how the story will talk about this childhood game in Korea and what billions of money they are talking about in the series. At the worldwide beginning of the pandemic last year, I think we witnessed the popularity of the Korean series Crash Landing on You, particularly, both in Korea and internationally. Not in every part of the globe, but it could be said that that was the moment when lockdown was universally imposed and Netflix also started growing into people's lifestyle even deeper. So now in 2021, after 1 year in pandemic, what has been continuing with Netflix content is quite incredible. And one major importance I want to point out today is how non-English contents have emerged and people are hooked up with foreign language content. One of them is Korean culture content. Netflix certainly lowered the language barrier and opened the door wider to global audience. But what's more interesting, aside from a language choice, is that indigenous, whether traditional or modern, Korean culture came to the center of discussion by foreign viewers and curiosity. And it also became a creative content that is recreated and re-experienced by non-Korean audience, just like Filipinos do in the Philippines. I think one example can be 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다 game, the red light and green light game, or the retro snack 달고나, which foreigners find it very fascinating and try in their own ways. Um, Aside from Squid Game, when director Bong Joon-ho's internationally acclaimed movie Parasite was loved by many people outside Korea, and also when the movie Minari by a Korean American director Lee Isak-chung surprisingly showed the realistic narratives of Korean sentiments, Koreans in Korea were wondering how non-Koreans really watched those movies and how they could understand the embedded meanings and messages. So I think this is quite prevalent in with Squid Game as well. And this is why we are in this forum today. More than theatrical devices or fictional stories in Squid Game, we hope the forum can bring about interesting and important points you could ponder upon what Korea is like now in the 21st century and how Korean society and its people are evolving now, and what realities are pictured in Squid Game. Our panelists today will share their insights on Squid Game based on their lived experiences in Korea as well as their academic expertise. Recently, starting from a Twitter post to various Western media, it was reported that some lines of Squid Game was not correctly translated. And although personally I believe the translation was harshly created more than I supposed it should be, what rather surprised me was how global viewers are now paying more attention because they are eager to understand Korean content more accurately and more genuinely. Imagine when we only had VHS or cinema, which was the only way we could watch foreign movies. We couldn't really demand the much more or critically think about what we were watching. But now that people can really watch Netflix, and people know that what they are watching, and they wish to interpret the series and movies much better. So this should be a positive phenomenon to note, I think. So once again, UPKRC thanks everyone who joins us this afternoon, and we hope participants from different parts of the Philippines and also from other countries will enjoy discussion and interaction with other panelists and other viewers. And thank you to UP Arirang for being part of this event. So let us have a fruitful afternoon. Maraming salamat po. Kamsahamnida.
All right, 감사합니다, 선생님. Thank you so much for that wonderful opening message. And I hope that piqued your interest to participate in today's forum. We are looking forward to hearing your questions and comments as we listen to the insights of our panelists today. And to introduce to you our panelists, let me just um, uh, read to you their some of their background information. Let me start with Mr. Mark Ysla. He is a faculty member of the Department of International Studies and currently the Associate Dean of the Institute of Arts and Sciences of Far Eastern University. He holds a master's degree in international studies with concentrations on international relations from Sogang University Graduate School of International Studies in Seoul, South Korea. His research interests include ASEAN affairs, ASEAN Korea relations, East Asian International Relations and Human Security. Next, our next panelist is Mr. Ronel Laranjo. He is currently the president of Global Korea Scholarship Philippines Alumni Association and GKS Publicity Envoy. He earned his MA Applied Linguistics degree in Korea University and received his PhD and bachelor's degree at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He teaches in UP Diliman Departamento ng Filipino at Panitikan ng Pilipinas, College of Arts and Letters. And third, we also have Mr. Jericho Pascual. He serves as Film Program Associate, among other things, at the Film Center of the UP Film Institute. He is currently finishing his MA in Media Studies, Film, and takes interest in cinema relocation and spectatorship. Of course, throughout the forum, we will also be joined by Dr. Kyung Min Bae for the discussions. And to finally begin our forum, let us start with, I guess, the most basic question. Um, we would like to hear from our panelists what they think of the series Squid Game. Of course, again, we are assuming our participants here have seen the series on Netflix. So from here, let's hear the thoughts and opinions of our panelists uh, of what they think of the series Squid Game. Can I let me start with Mr. Mark Isla, sir?
Hello, good afternoon. Okay, um, I'll be sharing my screen for um, my PowerPoint presentation. So, how did I find the drama Squid Game? Well, at first, I was really curious about the series because I saw the trailer a month before it was released via Netflix, and I thought it was a game. It was a series that presents a story about a group of people who will be joining a game, but I never thought that it was kind of uh, that violent. Okay, so right off the bat, I thought the series is quite violent and disturbing in a completely different level. I thought that I never really thought that a Korean series would have that kind of storyline or flavor because most of the Korean series that I've watched, there's violence also, but it's not in the same level as these particular series. So I thought at first it was kind of violent and disturbing at the same time. Second, I think it is entertaining. It's entertaining because of one, the production design, the cinematography, and I think the writer and the director was able to capture the audience attention and interests. Like you would really feel like you need to see, all the episodes because you're quite anxious about what will happen next. I think after the release of Netflix, I was able to. I mean, I watched the series in one day, like from 8 o'clock in the evening until 3 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, because I think I was really. I mean, the series was able to get my attention. And lastly, I think it's interesting not because of not just because of the story, but it's also because I thought while watching each of the episode, it presents several social issues, and also it presents elements of culture of the Korean society. So because of that, it made for me, I think the series was really interesting. Okay.
Thank you so much, Sir Mark.
Yes.
Now, all right. Can this time can we hear from Sir Ronel about your thoughts of the series? You're on mute, sir. Sorry.
Sorry, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Annyeonghaseyo 여러분. Good afternoon to all of you. Ako siguro, tinitingnan ko siya sa dalawang lente. Una, yung Netflix kasi sa akin these days, mula nung nag-start yung pandemya, para for entertainment siya. Parang for mental health and for self-care, Netflix ako para sumaya, makaramdam ng ibang emosyon bukod sa parang kawalan ng pag-asa. Kaya nung napanood ko itong Squid Game, dahil sa impluwensya ni Kuya Mark, kasi nag-usap kami, tapos sabi niya, itong Squid Game okay to kasi pinapakita niya yung mga social issues in Korea, tapos maikli lang siya, parang episode 9 ko. Kaya isang araw gusto ko lang mag-relax, tapos pinanood ko siya buong araw. Tapos gusto ko lang naman mag-relax eh. Pero after kong panoorin yung video na yung series, yung buong series, medyo na-depress ako. So parang as a viewer, na yun nga yung pinanggagalingan ko yung Netflix source sana ng entertainment. Kaya hindi ko siya parang sakto lang sa akin. Hindi ko naman sinasabing parang pangit siya, kundi meron siyang value, entertainment value, and also siguro effective din siya kasi nga parang naparamdam niya sa akin yung depressing issues ng Korean society. Kaya parang mas ako sa forum na ito, ako yung sa gitna na sakto lang tapos papuntang negative side. Pero yun, objectively. Tapos yung ikalawang lente, kunyari, nagtuturo ako kung nagtuturo ako or kung may mga subjects ako tungkol siguro sa Korean society, ipapanood ko to sa mga estudyante ko para doon sa critical perspective nung tulad nga nung sinabi ni Kuya Mark kanina na parang mas nagpapakita ito nung ibang mga issues na hindi alam ng karaniwang Pilipino. Kasi nga parang tayo ngayon puro K-pop, Hallyu Wave, tapos feel good, Korean drama, kilig. Pero ito iba yung paparamdam niya sa inyo. So kung gusto niyo ng ganong pakiramdam, panoorin nyo. Pero sa akin, yun nga, it was depressing for me. Personally, kailangan ko siyang i-process kailangan ko may makausap tungkol dito. Kaya nung may nakausap ako tungkol dito, umokay na ako. Tapos kailangan ko ulit siyang panoorin for this forum. At yun nga, kausap ko kayo ngayon. Kaya after nito, magiging okay na ulit ako pero hindi ko na ulit siya papanoorin. Okay. Yun lang siguro sa ngayon. Tapos papalawigin ko na lang yung iba pang mga punto ko. Salamat.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Ron. Sobrang mixed feelings talaga. No? Thank you. And also, of course, can we hear from Sir Jericho?
Hello, good afternoon sa lahat. So kung ang thoughts sa Squid Game, dalawang parts ko siya sasagutin, no. Una, Squid Game is meron siyang deviant character. Kumbaga nagde-deviate siya dun sa mainstream na napapanood natin when it comes to K-drama or to Korean content na madaling ma-access. Hindi siya yung super far away, no, doon sa popular ni noon, sa mga con na madaling panoorin or para madaling ipasa sa friends tapos papanoorin na natin ng sabay-sabay or para papanoorin natin tapos pagkukwentuhan natin later on. It has its may deviation siya, but it's not so far. But kunyari, i-survey mo yung mga Korean content sa Netflix, wala na siya doon sa center. But it orbits around that system of mainstream Korean content, no. And yung deviant character niya, for me, sa experience ko, may apat na bagay kasi siya na reminiscent siya of other Korean cultural products, not necessarily na mainstream products, no. Actually reminiscent yung violence, yung style ng violence na nabanggit nga din ni Sir Mark. It is reminiscent of some Korean directors na hindi mo makikita yung films nila sa Netflix. Makikita mo sa ibang streaming sites. Yung iba siguro pinipirata pa. Pero madalas lalabas pero yung mga pelikulang yon na nag-premiere sila sa Cannes halimbawa, sa mga film festivals, sa international film festivals. And yun, reminiscent yun, katulad ng mga works nila Kim Ki-duk, ni Park Chan-wook. Yun yung siguro to mention a few, yung Vengeance trilogy. Tsaka yung films ni Kim Ki-duk, it has that style of gore and blood and violence. Yun yung one feature, no, or one aspect kung bakit itong Squid Game may deviance siya from the K-drama that we know. And at the same time, yung motif din nung children's games. Actually, one Filipino short film entitled Taya, no, na available actually yun sa YouTube, mapapanood doon. Directed by Adi Buntuyan. Ganun din yung motif. So Squid Game reminded me of that short film na yung children's games, ginamit na simulation and metaphor of grown-ups social ills na state-sponsored actually. So, may ganong parallel na may kita nyo rin, na nangyari din, nakita natin sa Squid Game at nandun din sa pelikulang yon. And lastly, yung element ng 1984 ni George Orwell. Diba? May Big Brother, may katulad ni Frontman na nanonood siya from sinasurvey nila at pinapanood nila kung ano yung behavior ng mga participants ng gamers dun sa series. So, yung mga elemento na yon, pag sama-samahin mo, tapos naging Squid Game na siya, 'di ba? Ang layo niya dun sa for example sa Crash Landing on You, even sa Goblin, and it has its style na social realist in the thing. So, yun yung merits actually ng Squid Game. And yun ang first thoughts ko about it. But it doesn't mean that it's na yun yung reasons for liking it. It has its merits, but we're here to discuss our further observations and judgments kumbaga sa Squid Game. There.
All right. Thank you so much, Sir Iko. So we heard a lot of different opinions about the series, and different emotions also were triggered among different people. So perhaps some of our audience here felt the same way as some of our panelists. So perhaps later you can also share your thoughts about the series as well. And now let's start the discussion formally with the first question. And perhaps we can start by looking at not just Squid Game itself, but the entire industry as a whole. Um, Korean dramas have been popular around the world, not even before Squid Game, and that's an interesting phenomenon. And that is one thing that we'd like to know what you think of. How what were the things that helped um, amplify the popularity of Korean dramas internationally, especially during the time of now that we have easy access to streaming sites like Netflix. So, what do you see as, say, the major factors that help these Korean contents, particularly Korean series like the Squid Game, very popular even outside Korea? Can we start with Sir Ron?
I think malaking factor talaga yung nasa pandemya tayo. As in, hindi lang naman sa Pilipinas, kundi sa buong mundo. Kasi 'di ba parang nung pre-pandemic, yung panonood ng mga series, ginagawa lang natin every weekend or kung meron tayong free time. Eh ngayon, hindi tayo pwedeng makalabas. Kaya parang para lang ayun, tulad nga nung comment ko kanina na naglalaan talaga ako ng oras sa isang araw na pag ano na ako sobrang dami na ng trabaho, parang pupunta ako sa Netflix or other streaming website para lang maiba yung feel ko. Kaya so I think yun talaga yung tsaka yung meron naman ng din sa context ng Pilipinas, meron naman na tayong Netflix even before the pandemic. Parang actually naghahanap nga ako ng um, tawag diyan ng statistics from Netflix kung ilan yung um, mga Netflix subscriber dito sa Philippines, pero ang meron sila pre-pandemic 2017 400,000. Pero so parang ngayon dahil wala, pero I suppose na dumoble yon sa mga 1 million ano. Tapos 'di ba parang sa Facebook parang meron ka pang makikita na parang yung isang nagbebenta siya ng ano niya, yung account niya kasi yung multiple account parang magkano yon, parang yung sa isang account 150 pero pag multiple account parang mas makakamura. So parang yung Netflix yun, ang sa Pilipinas at least, yung naging trigger niya talaga yung pandemic at yung kagustuhan ng mga tao para kagustuhan ng tao na maka-feel nung ibang feeling sa pamamagitan nung panonood ng mga series sa loob nito.
All right, thank you, Sir Ron. What about Sir Mark?
Well, I think one of the reasons kung bakit naging popular itong ganitong klase ng series would be or what are the factors that triggered the popularity. Ayun, I would agree dun sa sinabi ni Ron that it has something to do with the situation that we are in right now. A lot of people are looking for, some sort of entertainment while they are confined in their own houses. So that's one of the reasons I think kung bakit maraming, like in my case, I've never really watched Korean series before, even when I was in Korea. Because I'm not really sure why, but I just feel like I'm not really into it. Okay, but then eventually, maybe because of what we're experiencing right now, there's a need to escape from the reality for a moment. So I think yun yung isa sa mga naging reason kung bakit I watched several series sa Netflix and also in other live streaming sites. So yun, I was able to watch many Korean series. Siguro another reason would be yun nga, yung entertainment value of these Korean series or dramas. But it's not, because it's not the typical series that we have here in the Philippines, right? It's more of, dito we usually watch series about romantic, relationship and all. But in the series, the Korean series in Netflix and in other sites, there are different stories that you can watch. Like there's something about doctors, lawyers, diba? There's something about politicians. I've watched several political drama series, like The Chief of Staff. Also, the Designated Survivor, and also The Assembly. So those are like my favorite political dramas in Korea. It's quite interesting to see how these series were able to reflect what's happening in those specific sectors of the society, diba? Also, yung idea din na people know Korean wave, diba? And as you mentioned, a lot of movies were able to were able to achieve something, diba, internationally, like Parasite, Train to Busan, and Minari. And so I think people already recognized the value of Korean entertainment. So that's one of, I think, those are some of the factors why these Korean series became very popular.
Sir Iko?
Ayan. So being the person immersed on media studies here, no? Ganun ko siya sasagutin. But I see sa consideration there are three factors for it. Unang-una yung production quality. The production quality that has been produced from South Korea, kahit nung mga high school pa tayo, and I'm talking about like yung mga series like Coffee Prince or ano ba, Full House, di ba? Yung production quality nila, ano na siya, nasa ibang level na siya from what we can see from our local productions. So, yung ease of reception at saka yung pagkakagawa nila doon yung pagkakagawa nila translated to our ease of receptions. Madali na siyang panoorin, hindi na siya hard to watch, at hindi rin siya super familiar with what we can see here na we could be allergic to it. So, its production quality invites us to it, and sometimes it becomes an escape, as Sir Ronel, diba, as pointed out kanina. In this time, you may want to watch a film or watch a series para ilayo mo muna yung sarili mo doon sa realities. And I think that's one. It triggers or it amplifies our attraction na i-consume yung Korean content, no? And at the same time, as they are doing, di ba, may production excellence na sila, following the formula set by previous series, by previous productions, and they see na, okay, this one works for this kind, for the series, for the production. I-adapt din naman nila yan eh. Kahit naman dito, locally, it happens, that formula. And people who work sa media, sa production, sa film, they know these things. Alam na nila na dapat dito, ito na yung dapat na ma-experience ng nanonood. That's not to say na wala tayong agency no pag nanonood tayo, but they have this expectation, and sometimes those expectations are being met pagka nanonood tayo. Kaya din nahumaling tayo sa mga pelikula na rom-com na gawa locally. And ngayon, those formulas are being followed. Ano ba mapapansin natin? Kunwari sa Korean series, siguro nasa mga episode 11 to 13 pa magiging magtutugma yung feelings ng couple. Nandun din siguro in between those episodes, baka nandun maghahalikan, tapos may expect mo na, tapos doon ka na rin kikiligin. And then, alam rin natin, ano pa ba yung alam natin? Bawat episode, laging sa dulo may pambitin, which will actually hook you para i-click mo. Lalo na sa Netflix, may ganun silang feature na hindi mo natatapusin yung credits, punta ka na agad dun sa next episode. Because they want us to binge din eh. They want us to continue watching. So, nabitin ka na sa dulo, tapos you have been offered this option, this feature na punta ka na agad sa next episode, nod ka talaga, di ba? So, the formula brings us, that's why it's possible for us to watch a series that we take particular interest in and finish it like in one night or in one day. I know someone na tapos na yung 16 episode na isang araw. Yun lang, nanood lang siya, tapos natulog na ulit siya, tapos next day na ulit. And lastly, which I think has really helped amplify this our tendency towards Korean content is technology. Lipas na yung mga araw na maghahanap tayo ng DVD sa bangketa or sa Quiapo. Kahit pirata na, di ba, papakita natin sa friends natin DVD, tapos collection siya ng maraming Korean content. Sa likod, makikita mo, marami doon. Lipas na yon, hindi mo na kailangan ng DVD player ngayon. Kailangan mo na lang ng internet at ng device kung saan manonood ka. And in particular, actually, Netflix has made it very, very accessible for us. Accessible siya in terms of ang bilis nung delivery ng media. Tapos, ang daling mag-subscribe, ang daling gumawa ng account at manood. Tapos ang wide din ng reach niya, talagang hinahouse nila yung mga productions kahit hindi yung mga productions na sila ang nag-fund. And this easy access allowed us to consume Korean content in a swipe of our fingers. And actually, this is affirmed pa ng pandemic. Of course, we're looking for that. We're looking for this experience na binibigay ng cinema, di ba? Never has it been na walang form of art na nagbigay sa atin ng ganitong manner of seeing, na gumagalaw yung pictures, naging animate, di ba? May nagiging nagkakaroon ng sequence, nakakaroon ng movement, and dahil nagka-pandemic, we miss that experience, we miss that feeling. We miss that manner, that way of seeing. And since this has been available, talagang siya, easy option. Okay, pupunta lang ako dito. And actually, bago pa naman mag-pandemic, it has been taking over. Ang nagdadala na lang ng ganong karaming tao sa sinihan ay actually Marvel movies. Yun na lang yung mag-gather ng tao tapos mapupuno yun. Kaya struggle na siya before. And kami sa Film Center, we have been experiencing it. We've been looking for ways how to invite people back to the cinema. It had been hard. It wasn't an easy route. Kahit nung mag-pandemic talagang we've been looking for ways how to get to people to watch on-site. And nung mag-pandemic talagang sarado, okay, punta tayo sa cinema. But punta tayo sa streaming. But that doesn't mean na cinema is dead. Actually, it has its it relocated there, and it's another life. But the experience of seeing images like this, moving images, nag-continue doon. And ngayon, with South Korea's vision, diba, of sharing their culture, ayan yung Hallyu. Tapos ganito yung vision din ng Netflix, which is global. Actually, nagtugma. It's the perfect platform, it's the perfect technology to share Korean culture.
All right, thank you, Sir Iko. So just to put them together, the main factors that you mentioned: number one, the pandemic itself, and then the availability of the streaming platforms, Netflix, as well as yung mismong content mismo nung shows, easily absorbable, relatable even to non-Koreans, among other things. So it's good to hear that there are a lot of different possible reasons why Korean dramas in general have clicked among global audiences. And yeah, like what we mentioned earlier, um, the popularity of Korean dramas have been around not for years now, and until recently, we have seen developments, changes in the content as well as quality of Korean cultural contents, and it's interesting that it seems like Korea doesn't run out of ideas of new um, themes, for example. And that's something that we'd like to hear from our panelists. From your own perspective, what do you think are the inspirations of these creators, so that they are able to make contents that are rather uniquely Korean, but at the same time still relatable to non-Koreans? Can we hear from Sir Ron?
Okay, kasi siguro sasagutin ko yan sa perspektibo ng culture kasi yung film and series and any Korean dramas, they are product of Korean culture. At yun sa culture kasi ang tendency natin, nakaka-relate tayo, kaya natin siya kino-consume or bago sa atin, bago sa panlasa natin. So parang usually parang doon lang tayo nagkakaroon. So parang yung mga series naman ng sa Korea, ah, produkto 'yon ng kanilang kultura, produkto ng kanilang karanasan. Kaya parang it's new for example, sa mga hindi pa nakakakita ng gano'n o hindi pa nakakapunta sa Korea or wala pang nakasalamuhang Korean sa buhay nila, it's new for them. So it's quite interesting. Pero kunyari kung ikaw naman yung so puwedeng magsimula dun na dahil bago sa'yo, nagustuhan mo, iko-consume mo na. Tapos ito kasi, sa pangkalahatan mailalapat natin dito yung cultural commodification. Tulad nga nung sinabi ni, Iko kanina na alam na nung, Korean yung production ano nito, yung production cost, yung kanilang strength. Kaya yun yung ano nila, kina-capitalize nila kasi nga sa globalization ngayon, yung cultural commodification, ginagawa nating commodity o mga produktong nabebenta, kinokonsumo yung isang kultura. At yun nga, 'di ba, parang hindi lang naman yung limitado doon sa mga Korean dramas and series and telenovelas. Pati naman tayo sa Pilipinas, ginagawa natin yun. Pero sa ngayon kasi yun na yung subconscious na siya na form of ano din, meron ding perspektibo na nagsasabi na ito ay subconscious form of colonialism na kasi nga yung kultura ay kung titingnan natin napaka-epektibong ano din ito, paraan para makolonya ang ating pag-iisip na 'di ba kahit Pilipino tayo, at ayon parang meron tayong pag-ayaw doon sa ating kultura kasi nga meron na tayong may ibang kultura na mas gusto na tayo. So, mas gano'n. So, sa tingin ko, doon nanggagaling yung mga ideas nung mga products from Korean products or parang yung Korean series na starts from their culture and then yung kaibahan kasi nila sa halimbawa sa mga telenobelang Pilipino, napakahaba kasi nung ating mga telenovela, 'di ba? Parang kasi yung kultura, yung parang ano, konteksto naman ng ating mga telenovela, pinapanood kasi yun nung unang mga target niyan, pinapanood kasi ng mga nanay na ang daming ginagawa. So parang tapos very ano, verbal din yung ating mga telenovela na parang, 'pag napakinggan mo kahit hindi mo siya pinapanood, malalaman mo yung story habang may ginagawa ka. Pero yung mga Korean dramas kasi napakaiksi, parang 'di ba yung, probinsyano, 5 taon na ngayon pero tinatangkilik pa rin ng tao. Yung mga ano naman, Korean novela kabaliktaran at, kasi nga nandun din yung kultura nila, yung kultura ng Korea na pali-pali, fast culture, dali-dali, anong tawag, ura-urada, kaakibat nung kultura nila yun. Kaya parang, kung napansin natin, itong Squid Game episode 9 lang siya tapos na parang nanood ka lang ng 3 trilogy na movies, parang gano'n. Pero ano na tapos pero yung mga average na Korean dramas parang ranges from 10 episodes, 15 to 20 episodes, 'di ba? At relatively 20 hours lang ng buhay mo yon versus probinsyano na 5 years ng buhay mo, 'di ba? Parang so meron ding gano'n kaya siyempre doon sa haba nako-compromise din yung story. Kaya parang merong mga cliche na sa mga telenobelang Pilipino, pero dito sa actually ay yung nanonood din ako sa kapapanood ko ng mga Korean dramas, alam ko na unexpected yung mga scenes, kaya ine-expect ko na unexpected sila. So may meron akong ganong ano na, may formula nga tulad nga nung sinabi ni Iko na parang itong mga formula hindi lang natin siya napapansin kasi nga parang kino-consume natin ng kino-consume. Pero kapag ikaw kasi yung nanonood talaga nun, parang nangyari na 'to tapos parang, yun nga parang yung sa'kin na, ito dun tayo nili-lead nung story nito pero hindi yon. Parang mas gano'n kaya sa tingin ko napakalaking factor nung kultura doon sa mga produktong ito.
All right, thank you, Sir Ron. Sir Iko.
Ako na may add ako doon. Tama yung sinasabi ni Ronel eh. Actually, gaano katagal actually yung oras na binibigay natin kay Provinciano. Actually, hindi lang kay Cardo. Pati sa commercials ni Cardo. Pati sa commercials ng lahat ng series na yun. And issue siya, kaya yung productions na from Korea, i-juxtapose, itabi mo siya, ibangga mo siya sa productions natin. Issue siya ng pera eh. Paano kasi sila kumikita. And they earn money differently than we do or than they do. So ngayon, kaya yung production natin kailangan may star ka lagi dyan at laging may commercials ka kasi lalagyan mo ng ads na yun ang nagbibigay ng pera dun sa gumagawa nung teleserye or pati ng network. So, it works differently. Kaya yung products, magkaiba yung dating. Siyempre, papasok din nga doon yung kultura, no? But to answer yung ni-raise na question ni Marco, what I see for recently, pagka mga series or content na ma-access natin sa streaming, pag Korean content, may fusion lagi ng genres. Like when Kingdom, or actually Train to Busan, hit, siya parang okay, it's new na zombies, tapos unique yung idea na nasa trend siya. And then biglang may Kingdom na yung what was popular na historical drama, hinalo nila with the zombies. What will come out of it? And actually it works pa rin, tapos ganun yung treatment. So yun yung nakikita ko lang. I think I'm not very keen as I'm not very knowledgeable on Korean culture, on ano yung mga feeling nila pwedeng ilagay sa content na nakakarating sa atin dito. But that's what I see from their productions. May fusions ng genres, ng styles, kumbaga that's how they experiment on doing their contents without necessarily being experimental sa form and sa form, but they try to mix things and see how people react. Tapos I was gonna say something pero pag nabalikan ko, i-release ko ulit sa atin, but yun, dun muna, fusion of genres and styles.
All right, sige, Sir Mark.
Yeah, I agree dun sa mga explanations given by Iko and also Ron. And I think, for me, I think I would look into it in the perspective of, globalization, how Korea was able to somehow step up in terms of, because they know exactly that there's a competition, right? So because if we're going to look at the way, for example, yung movie na Parasite and all, and other Korean series now, diba? There's already a fusion of modern and also traditional, because of globalization. Koreans wanted to somehow showcase their culture without somehow without making the audience kind of bored because of yung mga stories medyo traditional, like before kasi, di ba, so marami ding mga sumikat na mga traditional drama in Korea, but nowadays nilalagyan nila siya ng fusion, so that the global audience would be able to relate dun sa kanilang story. Yun. Plus, of course, I think yung globalization din, yun din yung nagbibigay dun sa mga writers and also directors to strive harder, di ba, na parang you have to work hard so that you'd be able to capture the global audience. I remember there's an article that talks about, how the Korean society was able to create yung mga class A writers of series, di ba? Kapag nag-click yung series mo, you would be considered an class A writer, and you will earn more compared to other writers. Diba? So there's already like a competition that was created um, through the global consumption of Korean series.
All right, thank you so much. Um, so that is like an overview of Korean dramas, Korean cultural contents in general. Now let's move on to um, specifically to the series Squid Game. Um, we you mentioned earlier about culture, and that is one big thing showcased in the series Squid Game, particularly yung children's game. For those who have seen it, diba? Uh, we later on realized that each of those games shown in the series are actually children's games in Korea. And just like what was mentioned by Dr. Bear earlier, those who can relate more easily with those children's games are actually ones who are in the older generations. Um, so perhaps first we like to hear from a Korean perspective first, then siguro. Um, what you think of its use, the use of uh, this cultural aspect, particularly the Korean games, in the series, and how do you think uh, was the series able to connect with the international audience, despite the fact that this is specifically Korean cultural aspect? No? Um, would you like to share with us your thoughts, Dr. Be?
Yeah, before panelists, maybe I can just quickly share my insights. Like dalgona is the honeycomb, like sugar made candy, and then 무궁화 꽃이 피었습니다. Green light, red light game is all children's game and daily fun stuff, which the current young generations don't really play anymore, because universally, like Filipino kids also prefer computer games or some other kind of leisure stuff. So Korean kids also don't have the same leisure or the same interest as those Korean kids 50 years ago used to play. But what was prevalent in this Squid Game series was kind of nostalgic for Koreans, because when Koreans who are in their 40s or 50s watch Squid Game, they suddenly realize these are the games they were innocently and purely just playing without hurting other children. But when we think of the game in Korean language, when someone is out or someone loses in the game, the word is used 죽다, 죽었어, meaning you're dead, you died. So what the motive the director of Squid Game really got is purely children say you're dead, you died, but it really becomes reality inside the show. So how the innocence children used to play becomes very harsh and very severe reality that Korean adults are going through with so many different problems and struggles. So I think it's for me, as I personally watched the series, it was very ironic, but in some moment it was very heartrending, because it was really children's game, but not everyone. I mean, no one in the series can really play, but it's just the survival. So I think that's all I can share for now.
All right, thank you, Dr. Be. Now, perhaps we'd like to hear from a foreigner's perspective, a non-Korean perspective, particularly from a Filipino perspective. How did Filipinos receive Squid Games, specifically cultural contents presented in the show. So how were Filipinos able to relate, if they ever did relate to the show? No? What were the factors that helped us Filipino audience understand or at least relate with the show? Can we start with Sir Ron?
Um, sa tingin ko very relatable yung mga games kasi meron din tayo nun, magpapakita ko ng mga nakita kong ano, parang post sa Facebook, tsaka mga memes kasi parang ito yung ebidensya na naka-relate talaga yung mga Pilipino dito. At parang yun nga, pinapakita na merong certain universality yung Korean game kasi ito galing to sa post ng DOT sa Korea, Department of Tourism in Korea. So naka-Korean siya. So inano nila, translate nila as pusit game or ojingo game. Tapos yung mugunga ko si Piosim nila yung red light, green light. 'Di ba parang naalala ko yung Pepsi 7 Up, nilaro ko to. So parang ito yung pinakakatumbas niya sa atin. Tapos yung syempre yung Jul Tarigi o yung Tag of War, yung Hilahang Lubid mula Luzon, Visayas, Mindanao, meron 'yan. Tapos yung Gusul Chigi, yung marbles game o yung Holland, 'di ba parang nakita natin sa atin kasi parang ano lang, pinapagulong lang natin tapos tatayain natin o sasapulin yung Holland nung iba. Pero doon nakita natin yung parang may siyempre may drama effect pa doon sa um, sa series. Tapos yung Squid Game, yung Ojingo game, nung ako personal, nung nakita ko yung ano niya, ang una kong inisip, Pico. Pero nung kasi 'di ba parang yung una ding step yung isang paa tapos ano tatalon-talon ng isang paa tapos eventually magiging ano na siya dalawang paa na. Tapos yun na yung start ng patintero side nung Ojingo game o yung Ojingo Nori. Kaya parang sa tingin ko, very relatable siya tulad nga nung nabanggit ko kanina na kapag kultura kasi ano, nakaka-relate tayo o bago sa panlasa natin, kaya natin parang nakakahiligan. So dito, parang pareho kasi merong mga laro sa Korea na ano, na pareho sa atin na malapit sa atin at meron din sa kanila tulad nitong siguro yung Ojingo game nga yung pinaka-unique sa kanila at yung ano yung Talcona, yung Saltang Popki o yung Talcona. Tapos ito rin yung parang nirelate din nung mga Pilipino hindi lang doon sa laro kundi mismo doon sa popular culture natin. Halimbawa, 'di ba itong ano na ito, malaking manika na 'yan. Parang ano daw kamukha daw ng Julius yung tawag diyan, maski mascot sa Julius Bake Shop. Tapos ito pa yung parang yung karamiya na walang kawala kasi 'di ba parang dalawa yung ulo niya so parang wala nang matitira doon sa ano sa game kung karamiya yung character. Tapos ito yung pinaka na surpresa ako. Kasi parang hindi ko nakikita to doon sa mga ano sa karaniwang post pero nung nag-search lang ako ng ano sa Facebook ito yung Talcona 'di ba parang in South Korea in my country Philippines yung sa Katol rich kid yung mga hindi makakaintindi nito kasi 'di ba parang yung Katol ginagamit yan sa pag ano lalo sa mga probinsya na malamok tapos kahit dito sa lungsod tapos pag bumili ka ng dalawang Katol hindi siya yung kailangan mo pa siyang anuhin, paghiwalayin. Tapos napuputol din siya parang itong sa talco na ano nga yung sa Saltang Popki. Kaya parang sa tingin ko hindi lang ano ay hindi lang limitado yung naging sakop din nung sa kulturang Pilipino kundi yung popular na kultura tapos yung meron kang masa tsaka meron ka nung sa iba pang class. Kaya sa tingin ko yun yung naging ano nito parang pang-akit nung Squid Game. Tapos gusto ko rin ano parang bigyan pansin yung sinabi kanina ni Son Sainim na yung parang pag nadeded nga. Sa Filipino kasi Filipino English, yung dead ka na sa pareho din na parang patay o kaya parang ikaw yung taya, yung sa Korean language kasi yung sulle, yung taya. pero parang mas ano yun, hindi masyadong violente versus dun sa dead. O dead ka na, tapos hindi ka nakasali, ganyan. Kaya sa tingin ko, merong universality at merong distinctiveness yung games doon sa Squid Game, kaya siya mas lumaganap at naging popular culture na kung titingnan natin sa ngayon.
All right. Thank you, Sir Ron. Sir Iko, would you like to add?
And yeah, gusto ko i-affirm sinasabi ni Ronel kasi nung tinanong na ako if I can participate dito sa panel. Siyempre, pa-reflect ka, paano ko nga ba na-receive yung series. And happy ako na marinig na gano'n. Gano'n yung experience eh. May tinatry mong i-juxtapose. Kumbaga, lalabas na. Compare and contrast yan. Kaya pagka magre-refer ka sa game, sunod na sa episode na red light, green light, mas Pepsi 7 Up ang makikita mo kaysa yung red light, green light. Ako ngayon, tawag ko pa rin doon yung Pepsi 7 Up na episode. Diba, yun yung nangyari, tas madaling reference. And at the same time, kumbaga, it's ginamit yung motif ng children's games to allow us to experience nostalgia. And then, after nostalgia, magko-compare and contrast tayo, how was it in our culture? And then, if we see the same things na katulad doon sa red light, green light, we refer to it as Pepsi 7 Up. And then, kapag something strange, yung antaw yung dalgona, hindi ko alam yun kasi wala namang ganong candy sa mga playground natin, di ba? Or wala naman tayong ganong laro na kailangan mong i-trace yung shape. Now, it gives us this element of wonder and surprise. Okay, ganun, that's how we learn of their culture. So, again, this is a cultural product and this is how a foreign culture arrives to us. Kumbaga, ano yung dala-dala ng media, yun yung idea natin of how it is to be there. Although, of course, hindi yan entirely na nakuha natin yung Korean experience or Korean culture. Partial lang. And, of course, this is bias. Kumbaga, ano lang nilagay nila doon. But, we still get those ideas. And it's still very, very different if you get to live doon. May inform ka pa ng mga ibang bagay na nangyayari doon sa society nila. But, ayun, to reiterate, my experience in watching the series was a juxtaposition pagdating doon sa games. Talagang compare and contrast what is in our culture and what is doon sa kanila, and are there any similarities between the two? Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Sir Iko. So basically, what we heard from the panelists, surely there were similarities and differences between our culture and Korea's, specifically when it comes to traditional children's games. So just like what Sir Ron mentioned earlier, yung mga ilang Philippine games na similar to what we saw in the series. No? So that's how we see the series compared to our culture. Now let's look deeper into the series itself and the different societal, cultural issues shown, or at least napansin natin dun sa series. Some of those issues that either explicitly or implicitly shown in the show is capitalism. That's one. No? Also, yung fierce competition in the Korean society, especially say employment, as well as materialism and the issue of humanity. No? So we'd like to hear from our panelists what you found most remarkable among these, issues presented in the series, especially based on your experience being in Korea. Perhaps you can start with Sir Mark.
Thank you. I know Ron has a lot has a lot to say about these issues. But I mentioned at the onset the reason why it became very interesting for me. It's because I was able to see how the series reflected on several issues in the Korean society. At first, I thought I was wrong. I wanted to actually think that maybe I have to look at the series on face value, right? then after I watched the series, I try to write my thoughts about, what are the social issues that I thought present in the series itself. Um, and then I saw the interview of the director and the writer of Squid Game, and he mentioned that he really tried to infuse social issues in the series itself. So that made me kind of confirm the ideas that I have, that indeed there are social issues discussed in the series. So more, I think, more crucial and also more evident would be the fact that many people in Korea are struggling financially. In the series, most of the people who sign for the games are struggling financially. And if you're going to look at the reality, it's not really that far, because household ratio or debt ratio in South Korea was already estimated to have exceeded $1.5 trillion in July. I think July this year. And most of the time, we think that Korea is a highly developed society, but in reality, there are also people that are struggling financially. And I think it was, if you're going to look at several newspapers, you will see that there is a growing disparity in terms of opportunity and also income amongst uh, the Korean public or Korean citizens. So that's one of the issues, of course. Another one would be, how the older generations of Koreans were depicted in the series. They're the most vulnerable sector of the Korean society. We saw the mother of Gi-hoon, who works relentlessly despite her old age and her health condition. Similarly, we've seen the mother of Sang-woo, who is so proud of her son for graduating from the top university. She's still working, selling fish in the market. We've also seen, the old guy who's part of the game, who's also a representation of how vulnerable older generation of Koreans, especially when you talk about how the Korean society becomes hyper competitive, right? So there are also issues of women being seen as inferior, and this is quite evident in the Kanbo episode. So each contestant had to choose their partner for the next game, and Han Minyo was trying to convince Ki-hoon and Sang-woo to take her as their partner. But both gave her a cold response. And then there's already a conversation why, you know, um, you don't want to take us because we're women. And in reality, even though Korean society have already progressed, there are still issues in terms of the recognition of how important the role of women in the Korean society, because we have to agree that you know Korea remains to be highly patriarchal society. So, and then you also have several issues like labor issues, the issue of unfair treatment of foreigners, and I think these kind of issues are not quite unique in the Korean society. Particularly when you talk about the issue of unfair treatment of foreigners. But I think because in the Korean society there's a move towards embracing multiculturalism, and it's also important that they recognize as a society the value of foreign workers who've been deployed in some sectors of the labor industry. Okay, And then siguro ano na lang, just to capture the entire essence of the series, I would like to talk about the grim reality of the capitalist society. In the frontman episode, there are three remaining challengers, and they were given fancy clothes and they were treated with a nice candlelight dinner as a reward for surviving the previous games. The three were seated in a chair, and I think this scene represents the capitalist society. Before you can enjoy a good life, you have to work hard, you have to sweat, and for you to be able to climb up the ladder. So I mean, for me, for example, the steak is a representation of good life, diba? As already reflected on the first episode when I think the daughter of Ki Hoon said that they went out for dinner for her birthday celebration and they had steak. And in this particular idea, I remember the book written by Ha-Jun Chang, entitled 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. So one of the 23 things that he discussed, the fifth thing, he said, one says assume the worst about people and you get the worst. So to quote, the market beautifully harnesses the energy of selfish individuals thinking only about themselves or at most their family to produce social harmony. And I think in the film, we were able to see people trying to, outwit one another, and because it also kind of reflected, how the Korean society was able to become a hyper competitive society because of they need to survive. Yeah. So those are some of the things that I wanted to kind of share, some of the issues that I saw in the film.
All right, thank you, Sir Mark. Sir Ron.
Very rich yung binigay ni Kuya Mark kasi nga halos isang dekada yung tumira at nag-aral at nagtrabaho sa Korea. Kaya hindi ko nadadagdagan yon. Siguro ako kasi mga 4 years akong tumira sa Korea, nag-aral. Siguro yung mga unique na nakita ko doon sa series, yung about suicide and depression, kasi sa OECD countries, yung mga mayayaman na bansa, top 1 ang Korea since 2012 or 2013. 'Di ba parang sa Pilipinas kasi ang perception natin yung harakiri mas Japanese mga gumagawa niyan, pero Koreans top the Japanese in terms of suicide, dahil nga connected pa rin ito dun sa sinabi ni Kuya Mark kanina, tsaka dun sa dinipict na sa buong series na depressive talaga yung society nila, kaya parang suicide is the only way out. Doon nakita naman natin kung gaano kadilim, gaano parang walang kapag-asa yung mga characters doon. Tapos 'di ba parang yung una, yung pinakita doon sa si Sangu, yung best friend ni Gihon, 'di ba parang nagtangka siyang magpakamatay, tapos may kumatok para i-invite ulit siya doon sa game. Tapos pero eventually doon sa game nagpakamatay din siya. Kasi nga parang 'di ba siya na yung imbes na patayin siya or para lang may manalo, siya, inunahan niya na. Tapos doon din sa mismong game, kasi 'di ba doon sa episode 1, alam na nila na mamamatay silang lahat, tapos nagbotohan sila. Pero bumalik pa rin sila. Yung alam na nila, yung siyempre sa una hindi nila alam na parang laro lang, tapos pag pag na-eliminate ka pala talaga, dead ka talaga pala. So pero dahil doon sa episode 2 pinakita yung nila, mga background nila, na parang kinonvince din tayo na parang yung mga character na to sobrang niya, parang napaka-depressive na nung kinalalagyan nila. Kaya parang nadja-justify ngayon yung paglalaro nila sa game, na isang form of suicide pa din. Tapos 'di ba yung ano na, yung malapit na towards the end, yung nanalo na sila doon sa Hilahang Lubid. Ay ano pala doon sa Holland. Yung Holland, 'di ba surprisingly na kung sino yung partner mo, siya yung kalaban mo. Tapos meron doon yung mag-asawa sila. Tapos yung naiwan yung matandang lalaki. Tapos eventually nagpakamatay siya doon sa may scene na nagpakamatay siya. So yung mga yung mga ganoong naka-reflect din talaga doon sa nung nature nung Korean society. Tapos siguro in connection with that issue kasi parang may mga pag-aaral na kapag uh, yung religion meron siyang correlation sa suicide. So parang yung gusto ko ring siguro ibigay yung konsepto na yung presentation ng Christianity in Korea sa buong series kasi I'm a Christian myself but I'm still critical of it. But still medyo kasi yung alam natin yung Korean ang nature nila Buddhist and Confucianist. Pero yung Christianity is arising since like 2000 or early 90s. Tapos makikita natin 'di ba yung unang sino to? Si si Gu sa si Gong Yu, parang nung nilapitan niya nakabihis ng maayos, nilapitan niya si Gihun. Tapos ang unang sinabi ni Gihun, parang Buddhist ako, hindi ko na kailangan maniwala sa Christianity or kay Jesus. Parang kasi nga yung buong pamilya namin Buddhist, 'di ba? So parang parang merong doon. Tapos yung isang teammate nila doon sa 'di ba yung hinaghihilahang lubid sila, meron yung isang moksanim o yung isang pastor, parang bago sila pumunta doon sa mismong nagpe-pray tapos minamak nung ni Jiyong na eventually nakita natin yung character ni Jiyong nakulong siya kasi pinatay niya yung tatay niya na pastor na yon parang isang side ng Christianity tapos nakita natin yung pastor doon sa huling game na hindi siya aalis doon parang sinacrifice kasi sabi ng Diyos parang Diyos ang magbibigay sa kanya ng kaliwanagan sa sitwasyong ito. Tapos parang nakita natin na parang yung ibang tao yung hinagis niya sa isang salamin para makita kung ano yung totoong yung doon yung fiberglass doon. 'Di ba? So parang itong mga to meron ding may ganitong patama sa Christianity sa Korea pero doon sa huling episode, medyo meron din namang na parang dito sa ganitong sitwasyon ng pagpapakamatay o ng ganitong klase ng kalugmukan, pwede pa rin may hinahanap pa rin tayong Mesaya na kung naalala ninyo na nung nanalo na si Guhun tapos ang unang scene sa kanya parang yung isang Christian na nagsabi na maniwala kayo kay Jesus, maniwala kayo kay Jesus. Tapos yun na kasi yung last episode. Parang na-view ko siya na parang meron ding pagtingin kay Gihon bilang Mesaya o ang tagapagligtas. Tapos parang magiging yon na yung red hair, ilang araw kong pinag-isipan bakit yung red hair Korean K-pop ba yun, pero kung i-connecta natin sa ganitong parang yung sa kapitalismo, 'di ba, parang yung sinasabi kanina ni Kuya Mark na baliktarin ang tatsulok tapos ang kulay ng revolusyon ay pula. So parang pwede siyang i-connect. Hindi ko alam kung super overreading yon pero yung Messiah, yung revolusyon, tapos 'di ba parang yung huling scene ang liwanag doon sa airport na tapos doon na naputol. Parang may hope pero hanggang doon lang 'yon. Parang gano'n. So sa tingin ko yung itong dalawang issue na to, siguro yun yung maidadagdag ko na napaka sa akin, tumatak talaga sa akin dahil nga naranasan ko rin siya personally and kung ilalapat natin sa mas malawakang pagkritika sa Korean society, pwede nating silipin o tingnan ng ganoon.
Alright, medyo maraming nabanggit, So, social ills ng Korea na we don't really often see in most of our popular Korean content. So, yeah, suicide is one big problem in Korea. It's also nice to see yung perspective ng Christianity dito. Na probably it wasn't explicitly parang pinakita talaga among others, no. Sir Iko, would you like to add?
Sige. Ano nga 'to, yung sinasabi ni ano 'no, ni Ronel. Yung sa dulo halatang talagang kailangan ng renewal ng kontrata. Kasi parang kailangan mo ng season 2. Ano mangyayari after? And I think it's really designed like that na, of course, yung sorry sa spoiler, no? Pero I think, pag nandito kayo, we assume na napanood nyo na. But yung death ni OL Nam, it doesn't really end there. It doesn't mean na mamatay siya, wala nang Squid Game. And um, mahalata mo rin naman sa production na parang yun, para siyang nanghihingi ng, okay, sana may next contract para may season 2. And yun din yung gusto nating um, tignan. Kasi because these kinds of production, yung ito, lalo na yung story ng Squid Game, one easy reference is Hunger Games na matagal na natin natapos yung trilogy na yon. And we see the arc of that story. And we wanna see that arc din dito sa Squid Game, which was actually, may potential siya nung episode 2. And episode 2 was my favorite kasi yun yung nag-decide sila na, okay, tigil na natin to. And tapos, but they had to leave empty-handed. And then, pero, pagbalik nila sa real life or sa real society, ganun din, parang nagkakapatayan din naman, or although slower and longer, but eventually they thought na baka mas marami pa silang chance kung babalik na lang sila sa island. But of course, they didn't know na they had to, na isang tao lang ang kailangan manalo dun sa, or I don't know if they had that idea or pwede bang multiple ang mananalo tas malaking cash yun. But ganon, kaya parang ang ganda ng episode 2 because yun yung it establishes na doon sa society, nandun ka man sa real society or nandun ka sa loob ng island, pareho lang actually nangyayari. There must be one winner lang. Yun lang yung only option. And it's also nice that ang dami ng representations dun sa, actually, I think it's really meant, it's designed to be like that na meron kang North Korean refugee or de factor. Tapos, kumbaga, other yun ng South Korean eh. Actually, hindi lang siya other, but it's the long-lost sibling or yung miss na miss mo ng sibling, gusto magkaroon ng unification. Meron din yung other ng foreigner na yun yung alam natin, yun yung nasa katauhan ni Ali na tayo mga Pilipino, stan naman tayo kasi dapat Carlo Aquino siya, di ba? Pero okay na rin. Kasi we see that, yun yung siya, representation siya ng highly vulnerable person. Vulnerable siya to discrimination in a Korean society. And you also have, yun nga, yung women, meron din ganon. At meron din yung, si Sang-woo, yung the selfish, learned person. Learned ka, pero deep inside, you only think about yourself. And that one I appreciate that sa Squid Game, that representation na hindi lang dalawa or hindi lang kumbaga yung class, ang wide ng range. So may class na kumbaga may intersectionality na tinatawag na merong class, meron ding gender, tapos meron din nga yung class na nakapag-aral ka ba or simpleng tao ka ba katulad ni Gi-hun. So ano pa ba ang appreciable sa production ng Squid Game? Yung kanyang style ng social realism. You don't see that often in mainstream K-drama. You see that sa films, but I don't know why it isn't applied to series. Maybe they were careful kasi who knows kung bibenta ba ang social realist na attack on such things. But yung mga ganong styles ng content, yun ang magpapakita rin sa'yo ng mga ganitong issues in South Korean society. Kunyari, dun sa Parasite. And I don't know if Parasite opened the door or opened the door wider kasi meron ka namang mga ganitong content doon. Hindi lang siya ganun ka-accessible talaga. And ayun, like I said, yung social realist na style and violence It reminds you of a lot of directors. Search nyo na lang yung mga works nila. In particular, siguro yung Vengeance Trilogy, especially yung Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance ni Park Chan-wook. Kasi doon may discussion ng no, yung organs na isa yun sa tema, yung organs kinukuha. And ang biruan nga namin dito sa bahay, kaya pala sa hospital playlist, ang daling makakuha ng organs kasi manggagaling dun sa SQUID game. So, yun na yung kinokontak na dun sa mga surgeons, no? And that's what you don't see again. That's what you don't see dun sa mainstream content. You don't see people na naglulupasay kasi wala silang pera pang gamot. Maglulupasay sila or maiiyak sila kasi life and death situation. And compare mo in real life na life and death na tapos wala ka pang pambayad sa hospital. So, parang mas mataas tuloy yung chance ng death. And hindi siya ma-achieve nung mainstream content. Kailangan mo ng ganitong attack. But to like encapsulate my thoughts on SQUID Game so far, no, I believe it attempted to critique yung structure ng society. Why must society be structured in such a way na dapat isa lang yung panalo? Why is it that when we try to lose ourselves for others to win, we feel na we also win? Yun yung sa episode 2 when they let go na, okay, tama na tayo dito sa games, balik na tayo. Why do we have to leave empty-handed? Bakit kailangan ganun natin structure in society? Bakit hindi pwedeng when I lose so that you win, we both win? So, ayun, mag-ahalala na pero bago pa ito maging campaign material, i-end ko na doon. No? I think that's what SQUID Game wanted to critique. That structure. But I guess it fell short pagdating dun sa pag-aano nung ganung thesis niya nung series na gusto nating sana makita natin sa season 2 or season 3, sana masagot ngayon.
Alright, thank you Sir Iko. So, ayan. In other words, ang dami nga talagang social, cultural aspects na touched upon sa series na we don't get to see often in other Korean series. So that really makes this one particularly interesting, especially to those who really want to understand the Korean society better. No? So, all right. We're moving towards the end of the forum. No? So we are already receiving some questions from our audience. We encourage those who still have some comments and questions to send them in through our Facebook and YouTube chat box, okay, or rather comment section. And now we are going to start our open forum. We will be reading some of the questions that we have received. And again, for those who would like to add, please make sure to include your name and your affiliation so we can address you properly. All right. The first question that we received is from Suhotra Roy Choduri. I'm so sorry if I mispronounced it. His question is: are there any similarities between the Korean society as depicted in the series and other capitalistic societies around the world? Perhaps you could have specified that, but anyway, can we ask siguro si Sir Mark? Can we start with Sir Mark?
Well, I think may mga similarities. There are similarities primarily because, well, a capitalist society is not a perfect society, right? And a lot of people, if you're going to look at it, a lot of people are somehow felt marginalized in the society. So, for example, in the United States, they also have inequality. Here in our country, as a capitalist society, we also have inequality. So I think there are similarities, but what is peculiar in the Korean society is, it's really a hyper-competitive society, right? And I think that's how they were able to thrive as a capitalist society because, everyone want to be ahead of the game. If you lived in South Korea, you know, at a very young age you will be prepared for your future. You have to study, and you have to study hard. You have to study aside from the um, aside from the how do you call this one? Aside from the things that you really have to study, you also need to learn added skills. Through the out of after school programs, because the mindset or the mentality of people is that you have to have a skill that no one else can actually do, or maybe few people can do, so that eventually you'd be able to have a comfortable life. I think that's the idea there.
Okay, let me read another question. This is from Nico Dizon. The question is it true that the English translation of Squid Game was so bad that it supposedly failed to get the real meanings and messages being relayed in the dialogues? This became a trend recently, no? Um, Perhaps you can ask Dr. Kyung Min Bae.
Earlier in the opening, I briefly mentioned, and my if I share my personal sentiment first, every translation is never flawless, because every translation has some problems, and the interpreting from the source language to target language is never perfect. But I also understand some lines that became very viral, especially on social media spaces, that for instance, what was incorrectly translated, there are some lines, and then I think some Korean speaking Americans or Korean speaking foreigners, including some Korean Americans, pointed that how to translate oppa, because oppa was translated in different words like old man or babe or some other words. And then when Ali was calling Sangu, how it's not very significant, the hierarchy between I mean in the Korean society, when you have to call someone who's older, like kuya in Filipino, hyung in Korean. So I think these some cultural nuances were a bit unshown in certain scenes. But my personal sentiment was there was some problematic translations, but I think it was not entirely wrong. And as I mentioned in the opening, I think it's also a nice way to look at the Korean content, because now that viewers are more critical, and we can also find out how we can really lessen lost in translation when we translate the cultural contents into different language and different culture. So I think this is a very good time that to look back Korean contents, and hopefully there will be more discussions in the future.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Bay. Now, our next question is from Roxanne Rosciento. The question is, I wonder how influential a K drama or K movie is to Korean society. I read an article regarding DP, a Korean series, that they abolished it because of the influence of the series DP. Perhaps Sir Ron can answer.
I think, relative kasi yung influential. Parang hindi sa ngayon hindi natin mage-generalize yung yeah, for the instance, yung DP, it had impact in Korean society, or in that particular issue. Pero what I'm sure of is, Korean drama and K-movie are reflective of Korean society, as we were talking, like from 1.5 years, 1.5 hours from now, 'di ba? So it basically really same with other dramas, I think. For example, 'di ba yung hit hindi natin maintindihan, or ngayon yung mga yung mga dinadub ngayon sa sa local televisions natin, yung mga K-dramas na may kinalaman sa mga kabit-kabit, 'di ba? Kasi yung Korean, aside from yung Korean kasi naungusan nila yung Amerika for highest divorce rate kasi may kinalaman pa rin yun sa society and culture nila. So yung mga ganon na din, na impact. Tapos there was a drama na bago pa magkaroon ng first female president, meron ng isang drama tungkol doon. So people were asking, is it because of drama or is it because of circumstances? Siyempre parang, of course, dramas and movies are still fictional, pero meron itong nakabatay ito doon sa reality, social realities, cultural context. So I think para hindi ko masagot ng direkta yung tanong na yun kasi nga very situational, but I view it as like that.
All right, thank you, Sir Ron. We have a comment here from JC Crisostomo. Sorry, it says here, I also think Korean filmmakers nowadays look in a larger perspective. They no longer consider competition boxed only on the Korean audience and thought of the international audiences as one of the stake of consideration too. There's more revenue there too, more audience, more budget. Perhaps Sir Iko can share his thoughts on this.
Ganun din, perhaps din, no? Kasi we don't know how much they're given, how much Netflix pays them for such. Kunyari, locally, they say na mas mataas pa rin ang theatrical runs ng isang pelikula kaysa sa pagbenta nito sa Netflix. But that's local content kasi, Filipino yun. And kunyari, kung ikaw sa Netflix, so compare mo ang Pinoy content sa Korean content, which is more global, which is more, actually the question is, which is more globally consumed. So, it's likely na mas mataas doon. But hindi ko alam kung ano ang culture sa Korea. But there was before, we had that thought na Koreans would actually start with themselves. Kumbaga, very specific muna sa culture bago ito maging universal, actually. And that's shared school of thought, no? And we thought then na gano'n sila gumawa ng pelikula nila, yung sila muna ang makakabasa. And it's more probably na hindi lang nakakarating yun sa atin because the platforms don't choose them because baka very specific. So we'll need data on that one. But since katulad nito, Squid Game is such a hit, of course, there's a market for it. And kumbaga na pag-uusapan yon between Netflix and Korean production companies. That's why you see Netflix producing series and films made in Korea.
All right, thank you, Sir Iko. We go back to the previous question about yung how influential K-drama is to the Korean society. Sir Mark would like to add.
Yes. Thank you, Marco. I just wanted to add dun sa idea na how influential a Korean drama. I agree with Ron. It's not really. I mean, it's difficult to say that the Korean drama is the one that influenced the Korean society. More of the other way around. What's happening in the society is actually reflected on the series that they produce. So, for example, dun sa case of DP, DP is like a military drama, right? Prior to the series, there's already like a lot of talks about the military service in Korea because it's a lot of people. I mean, many people view it as something kind of outdated or irrelevant. They no longer want to go through the military service, and so there are also other issues like the abuse and harassments that happen inside while people are actually serving in the military. So I think the series actually just reflected what's happening in the Korean society, and what I heard is that DP was able to somehow, you know, open the conversation about military service. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Sir Mark. We have another question from Madam Helwina Sadora. The question is, looking at Squid Game's success now, why do you think it took a long time before it received investment, especially if it's everyone's story? Dr. Bay?
My answer will be very brief, and there should be so many dynamic answers, but I can just quote what I read from a news report, which quoted director Bong Joon-ho, because one of his internationally acclaimed movie was Host, like the monster appearing in Han River, right? So when he first designed and when he wrote the script for the first time, there was no investors because realizing the image of Host in the movie was too expensive, and he really needed a lot of money to make the movie decent and realistic. So he waited and he modified the movie without giving up his script. So eventually it became a locally successful movie, but as well as it was a globally successful movie. So I think same story went with director Hwang, who made this series, because 10 years ago when he conceptualized the story and when he started writing the script, perhaps in that certain um, environment in Korea, there was not much investors who were interested in investing the movie. But I think we have to note that this time it was Netflix, because perhaps Netflix really saw the potential of Korean content, and they really saw this might really click the global audience. So after 10 years, it was invested by the global firm rather than domestic investors or domestic film sector. So I think that is really a very different story, how the series, which could have been a smaller version of Squid Game, really is flying very high, and it really met a global audience. So there should be so many dialogues, but I think reading about director Hwang's interview or other articles will help to understand this context.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Bay. Now, finally, for the last question, although I believe this was already discussed earlier, but perhaps Sir Ron can give us a recap of what was discussed. This is from Hannah Mallorca. Squid Game, Parasite, and K-pop groups like BTS, Blackpink, and EXO are examples of the Hallyu wave. What do you think is their charm point, and what makes them lovable worldwide?
Ayan, like what I said a while ago, it has something to do with cultural appreciation. For example, this bit Hallyu basically, the products are music, and then K drama, and then movies, and then yung kasama dito yung mga cultural products, 'di ba? So parang nagugustuhan mo kasi iba dun sa kultura mo, or konektado dun sa kultura mo, or exotic siya para sa inyo. 'Di ba? Parang siguro for Filipino audience or Filipino, meron kasi tayo napakalakas pa rin hanggang ngayon ng colonial mentality natin. Kaya yung very natural sa atin na kapag may bagong ah, ah, culture or kulturang inintroduce sa atin, we appreciate it right away, and then to the extent na kaayawan natin yung sariling kultura natin. And I think it's not just isolated case in terms of in Philippine culture. I think I met some Koreans who also don't want their own culture, but um, uh, what's this? Consume Japanese culture, and vice versa. Even Japanese, I met some Japanese that really doesn't really feel good about Japanese culture, but consumes American culture. So I think it has something to do with the with that kind of universal perspective on culture. So it depends. I cannot really generalize, but we can also view that phenomenon as that kind.
All right, thank you, Sir Ron. And that is the last question. We actually received a lot of comments as well, but unfortunately, we don't have much time to read all of them. But we thank everyone from the audience for sharing your questions and comments with us. And that is the end of our forum. Of course, we would like to thank most especially our panelists for today, Sir Ron, Sir Mark, and Sir Iko. Of course, Dr. Bey as well, and everyone who worked to make this forum possible. And so definitely we'll have more forums in the future. So if you'd like to be updated for of our future events, you can always visit our Facebook page, UPKRC or UP Korea Research Center, and we can also visit the YouTube channel. Sorry, YouTube channel of UPKRC to watch the recording of this forum today. And that concludes the forum. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you learned something new. I hope you enjoyed the series as well. And hopefully, the insights that you received from this forum would perhaps uh, enliven your interests further in Korea to learn more about them. And hope to see you all again in our future forum. So thank you, 감사합니다, and take care. Thank you.
Kamsahamnida. Salamat po.